Welcome back to another episode of Local Search Tuesdays. This week, I've got something a bit different for you. I'm sharing my slides from last week's Brighton SEO conference in Brighton, England. This is my 11th year speaking twice a year at Brighton SEO in Brighton, and it's always an awesome time. This time, I get to talk about something different. Instead of talking about SEO tactics, I shared tips for Google Sheets for digital marketers. I didn't talk about specific use cases. I just shared the tips and formulas that I use most often. Google Sheets is so ridiculously powerful, but most people only know how to use Sheets for basic math, so I thought it would be a good session. So here it is. Let me know what you think.
This is a friggin' sweet insider guide to Google Sheets for SEO. I am Greg. I am the COO at SearchLab, but you probably already know that because you're watching this on my video series. But in case this is your first time checking it out, I have a weekly series called Local Search Tuesdays. You can check it out every Tuesday. It's usually short 3 to 5 minute clips, but this time we're sharing my entire presentation from the recent Brighton SEO conference in the UK. And this is a fun picture of me speaking at MozCon a few years back. I'm lucky enough to get to speak at conferences all over the world, although a lot of times businesses will just put salespeople up on stage and they're not great at speaking and they'll stand locked behind the podium and they speak really quietly in a monotone and it's really hard to understand what they're saying. And even worse, they don't usually have design consideration, so the pictures are completely absent, the colors are completely absent. You just see a plain white background with black Arial font, and they pack every slide with bullet points and just read bullet points the entire time. And not only is it not fun to listen to a presentation like that, they've actually done scientific studies that have proven that bullet points kill kittens. So we're going to keep all the kitties safe this time around. And clearly, you've probably realized at this point there is a movie theme, and today's theme is comedy movies. We've got at least one comedy movie for every year in the last 50 years, including 24 movies from 1985, which was the golden age, the golden year for American film comedy. There is attribution to the side, so not only will you learn a lot about how to use Google Sheets today, you'll have a kick-ass list of movies to watch later. So let's get this going. Why the long face? Are you spending too much time looking up in amazement at the Google Sheets or Excel expert at your company? It's really frustrating when you don't know how to use the full power of spreadsheets. And you're probably here today because you feel like you're a little bit clueless with spreadsheets. And I don't want to seem like I've got a huge head with its own gravity system, but I have some amazing tips to share with you today. And unlike some of the presentations you may have seen in the past, I'm not going to talk out of my ass. I'm going to give you immediately actionable tips and even a downloadable guide to help you in your quest to be awesome at Google Sheets. But keep in mind, you got to understand how Sheets work. They are not a miracle pill that will jump you forward and do a lot of work for you. But if you follow all of the tips that I share with you today, you'll be able to make your spreadsheets as awesome as the Flying Elvises. So let's get this going, because just like a fat guy in a little coat, I got to squeeze in a ton of info here. So you know how it is. Every company out there has the go-to spreadsheet person. And for years, I've always been that guy. I'm like the Hanson brothers. I come in and I take things down. I make sure that my sheets or my Excel files are amazing. And I was actually an Excel guy for a really long time, but now I've completely switched and decided to use Sheets instead, because Sheets, man, the power is unbelievable. You can do some really cool shit with Sheets. But I'm also shocked when I talk to other marketers and business owners and find out that people don't really know how to use spreadsheets. But especially for digital marketers, we work with data on a daily basis, so we need to know how to use spreadsheets at a more advanced level than just doing simple math. And yeah, I know there's the whole lion in the room, or elephant in the room, I guess, if you want to say it's that big. But we can all ask ChatGPT to just write our formulas and app scripts for us. But you're going to be much better off in the long run if you understand how things work. So today I'm going to give you a crash course in Google Sheets. Since the presentation at Brighton SEO is only 20 minutes for a speaking slot, I'm going to share the things that I use the most often. But don't stress about trying to keep up, especially because I'm going faster for my weekly video series here. You don't even need to take photos of the slides because I've created a Google Sheet cheat sheet with everything. So you can download the Google Sheets cheat sheet right here. You can use this QR if you're watching, or just go to that link and you'll be able to make a copy of the sheet and have all of the info at your fingertips forever. But there's a really cool thing I did with that link, and that's one great tip. If you share a link to a Google document and add /copy to the end, it forces people to make a copy when they click on the link. If you have a shared environment where multiple people can touch these documents, this really helps because it prevents anyone that has edit access from accidentally making changes to your master template sheet. So definitely use that little trick if you've got other people that could screw things up for you. But keep in mind, I'm not going to be talking about how to use these things I'm going to be talking about. The cheat sheet has a little bit of use case suggestions, but in this talk, I'm not really going to talk about use case. I'm just going to explain how these things work so that you're able to use them for the things that you need to do for work. And I'm going to go really quickly so I can squeeze in as many explanations as possible. I'm also going to start with the basics before I share the more advanced stuff. It just flows easier that way. And if I start really advanced and then go to basic, it wouldn't really make sense. Anyway, so first of all, kind of shocks me that nobody knows about the paste format button in the main menu. People will format cells and then they'll go create a new section and then do the format manually to make it match the original section, or they're pasting formulas or conditional formatting. And it's really easy to just use that little button that's on the main menu, because otherwise you're having to click multiple times and set multiple things up. And if you're creating something that the formatting matches perfectly, just paste the format and it's so much easier to do. Another big trick that I like to do is to color code cells to let people know where the formulas are, so that if they're filling out information on the sheet, they're not going to accidentally break something. So if there's any sort of light shaded color fill in a cell, everyone at work knows that there's a formula in that cell and you shouldn't be touching anything in that cell. If the cell background is white, then you know that it's okay to change or enter data in that field or that cell. Another thing that makes it easier when you have really big sheets, it's a lot easier to navigate the sheets if you group rows or columns, especially if you're tracking things year over year and you don't need to see the stuff from 3 years ago. You can just group it so that it's still available, but it's not visible on the sheet. So it looks kind of like this. Once you group it, you've got the little plus button, and when you click the plus button, it expands out and it shows the various numbers there. Another big important thing I always really encourage people to learn is how conditional formatting works. Because if you have conditional formatting applied to your sheet, then certain data points will automatically be colored or formatted differently, which makes it much easier to analyze large data sets and find those patterns. But keep in mind, when you're setting up conditional formatting, if you have multiple conditional formatting rules applied to a single cell, the rules work in a top-down order. So if multiple rules apply, the highest rule on the list that applies is the one that is used. And you should already know how to set up pivot tables and how to filter data in these tables that you've set up. But sometimes you've got to create a sheet that's more of like a dashboard that will be used by team members or executives that don't really understand spreadsheets and don't realize they can click the little triangle button to filter the data in that row or column. So in these situations, I like to use data slicers. These were added in a few years ago, and they're basically filter buttons. It does the same thing as filtering data in a table with the little triangle button, but it's a big obvious button, and you can change the colors and make them even more obvious, and it's just much more user-friendly. So with the data slicers, you'd have the list on the left, and you could click billable and change billable, and it doesn't show you here, but I would say I want only the things that are being billed $3,000 a month, and boom. It filters that list immediately, and it just looks amazing. So it's super easy. It's great when you have non-spreadsheet noobs or non-spreadsheet users using these sheets that you're building. And if you work collaboratively on sheets where you've got a sheet that multiple people are entering data or editing, you can actually have it send an email when you leave a comment on a sheet. Now, sure, it's going to email whenever people create comments anyway, but people will only receive those emails if they have their settings configured correctly in Google Sheets or their Google settings in general. So if they don't have their settings set correctly, they wouldn't get this email. So I like to use this little trick to force an email to be sent. So if you just add a plus before an email address, when you click enter and enter that comment, it emails that entire comment to the person at the email address, not as the comment alert that they have to have settings configured correctly for, but just as a straight up email that will automatically go out. Another cool trick is you can link directly to specific cells on any tab in the same sheet. So it helps if you have a big sheet with multiple tabs and you want to have like a jump menu on the first tab to help navigate what's there, or even specifically if there's maybe data and an explanation next to it and you want to click to something else, you can link directly to any specific cell in the sheet. Just right click on the cell, select View More Cell Actions, and then at the bottom of the list, there will be a thing that lets you get a direct link to the cell. Insert that as a hyperlink, and voila, you get a link directly to that cell. I also really love to use named cells and named ranges, especially in more complex formulas. It's much easier to use a complex formula if you're naming your cells, because you'll turn something like this into something like this. It's so much easier to see what's going on if you can see what those cells are referencing. Now, the other good thing about this is if you're referencing cells that are on a different tab than the formula that the tab is on, you're also going to have the tab name with the exclamation point and the single quotes reference before each cell. When you do this, you don't need those tab references because the cell name is absolute across the entire spreadsheet. If you are using data validation dropdowns, which can be incredibly helpful when you're creating these dashboard type scenarios, I find it really helpful to add a separate library tab with all of your dropdown options listed out. So instead of creating a dropdown and typing into each dropdown, I like to do the dropdown from a list that is actually somewhere in the document. So if you go create this library tab, each of your dropdowns will have a list of data, and you would name the range so that then when you create the data validation dropdown, you can refer to that range and have it pick up all of that information. It will then be dynamic as well. I just put the name of the range at the top cell above the list of data. And if you're going to use VLOOKUP paired with that dropdown, I use the same naming structure. So it would look something like this. And this is from an audit document that we put together. So this is what one of the little kind of groups of data would look like on that library tab. We've got the list of data in the left column that shows the data that appears in the actual dropdown in the cell. We know from this that the name of this particular dropdown range is home_h1_geo. But we also know for the VLOOKUP that lets me calculate the score, it's home_h1_geo_range, because we know that just the name that's listed is just the left column because that's what goes into the dropdown, and then we put the entire thing under the same name with range appended to the end. So then it's very easy for anyone to go back and find any errors or do any updates to formulas moving forward. If you're a little bit rusty on the parameters for formulas, Google Sheets has a really cool just little pop-up explainer. So there's a little arrow next to the field or next to the basically options of the parameters for the formula. So when you click that little arrow, it will expand down and explain what the various parameters mean and how they work. So it's pretty helpful. Now, if you're trying to look things up, VLOOKUP is probably the most common formula, and you probably have used VLOOKUP in the past. It's used to find a value and then pull in another corresponding value. Now, VLOOKUP is V because it searches vertically in a range to find the value, and then it searches horizontally to the right of that value to find the corresponding value based on which column number you set. There's also a lookup that searches horizontally called, surprise, surprise, HLOOKUP, which finds the value horizontally and then searches vertically below that value to find the corresponding value. But each of those, they only search in one direction. It finds your value vertically or horizontally, but then it can only search to the right or below. So most people will instead use index and match, which lets you look in any direction. But I really like using X lookup. It was added only a few years ago, and it is really powerful. It's super versatile. You should definitely check it out. It lets you search in any direction, and it includes built-in search functions so you can look for specific things without using extra formulas. It also includes built-in error handling, so you don't have to then use if error, which you usually have to do with index match, because if nothing is found, it just shows you an NA. So you use if error to display something else, but XLOOKUP includes that built in, so you can have it display something if no value is found. If you're trying to count characters, len is a super powerful formula. You just do len and then put the field that you're looking at, and it will tell you how many characters are in the field. This is really, really useful in digital marketing. The if formula is a conditional statement. If something is true, do this. If something is false, do that. Super easy to use. You really want to use it all the time, honestly. So in this case, the cell is 123. The formula in the results box there says if that number is less than 100, it should say, if it's more than 100, it should say Greg rules. If it's less than 100, it would say Greg sucks. So in this case, it's more than 100, so I rule. And if you need to string multiple if formulas together, you could do that with ifs. Now you could do if, and then within the if, nest another if, and within that, nest another if. But if you have multiple statements and you really only need to check the first true statement and it can end, I like to use ifs. So in this case, we've got some Pokemon listed and what Pokemon type they are and what their speed is. And the formula there says ifs, so it's a conditional multiple statement. If the field with the speed is greater than 90, it displays fast. If it's greater than 50, it displays normal. And if it's less than or equal to 50, it displays slow. So notice the first one there displays slow because fast wasn't true, normal wasn't true, slow was true. But if you notice the Charizard with the speed of 100, it says fast, and it doesn't even have to look to evaluate the other formulas because it just moves on. The count formula is awesome because it counts the cells in a range that have numbers in them. Now, if there's a formula or if there's cells with text in them, they won't be counted. So count only counts numbers. So if you need to count non-empty cells, do you want to count just the number of cells that have anything in them? You want to use count A. So you would say count A and then the range. The sum formula is great because it adds the values of the selected cells or ranges. Pretty obvious. Most people know that. But sum if is really cool because it adds the values of the range if the conditional statement is met. So like with my Pokemon example here, if it's a grass type, we want to see what the total sum is of the grass type speeds. So you would say sum if, we look through the entire range of B14 through B22. We look for grass, and if it is grass, then we sum C14 through C22. So basically anything that has grass in column B, it will add the number in column C together, and we get a total of 185. Concatenate is great. It lets you combine strings of text. So in this case, if we wanted to take a root domain and a page URL string, we could get the full URL by saying concatenate the first cell with a slash in the middle and the next cell, and we get the resulting full URL. But you could also use an ampersand. I like to use the ampersand if we're just doing something down and dirty and quick. So we could do the same thing here, just use ampersand instead of concatenate and commas. I do this sometimes just because I'm lazy, and concatenate, sure, it can autocomplete, but you still have to type it out. This way, just use the ampersand and you're done. You can also split things out. A lot of times you may have a URL and you want to just look at the root domain or whatever that might be, and you can use the split formula to split a string of text based on a specific character. So in this case, you take a full URL, you split it on the slash that comes after the URL, and it will just split it out into however many cells it needs to split it out based on how many of those characters are there. If you need to copy a formula that's in the first cell, but you want to drag it down and have it be on every cell in that column, a lot of people will just click and drag down with the little drag handle to copy the cell down. But there's actually a cool shortcut. If you're in the cell with the formula and you hit Control D or Command D on a Mac, it will automatically fill that formula into everything else in that column. So super easy little shortcut there. Sometimes in random situations, you may need to paste data, but you want to flip the columns and the rows. So whatever is the column titles needs to be the row titles. It's a weird thing, but trust me, you're probably going to need to do it at some point in your career. So if you copy the data and then you right click on the destination cell and you select transposed, it will paste everything and switch the rows and the columns. You can use the unique formula to list the unique values in a selected range. So again, using our Pokemon, if we select the unique values of the Pokemon types, we end up with just the 3 unique values there. Super easy to use. Another thing that I have really used pretty often is finding the last value in a range that's constantly updated. If you need to find the last value in a range that's just set, it's pretty easy. But if that range will constantly be added to or even subtracted from, it's a lot harder to do that. So use index to find the first value in the range, and then combine that with count A to find the number of cells in the range, which then lets you calculate the location of the last value. So in this case, we're doing the index of the column B, which actually starts at B6. So I'm not doing all of B. I want to start where the data is. So B6 through the end of B. I'm counting how many cells are there. And then I want to use that number, which is the final number. Boom. It spits it out for me. Super easy. You want to make your Google Sheets even more badass? Learn how to use AppScript. Import range lets you pull data in from other Google Sheets. So it looks basically like this. You're going to put in the URL of the sheet that you want to import from, and then include the range that you want to import from that sheet. And boom, everything is spit into the new sheet according to what's in the old sheet. Now, a big important note here. Once you've imported that data, you can't edit the data. So if the data is imported in cell A1, and you go to D5 and type something in that was already there, then the entire import will break. So you really need to import into like a reference sheet and to do all your calculations or changes on some other sheet in that sheet that you've imported from. But this is really critical if you've got the same data in multiple sheets, because now you can have a single source of truth that feeds all of the other sheets where you're using that data, and you don't have to remember to go change a certain data point in 10 different Google Sheets. It's also especially helpful if you have sensitive data in a sheet, but you need other data in the sheet to be public. Like I've got a budget spreadsheet that's awesome, and the department heads need to see certain areas of it. But part of that budget spreadsheet lists out all of the salaries of everyone in my agency, which clearly shouldn't be public information. So I can import range and create a copy that just shows the important bits that the department heads need to see. Another really handy app script that I like to use is showing the last date a sheet was edited. Now, sure, you can go look in the history, but this just prints it out right there front and center. So you can use that right there, but you can get it later off of the sheet that you downloaded at the beginning. If you've got alternating rows and you'd like to hide or show alternating rows, or really any rows, this script lets you hide or show rows at the click of a toggle button. So clicking the button will hide them, clicking it again will show them. So you just drop in this formula or this app script right here, and boom, your button, once you attach the toggle actual, or name it whatever you want, but in this case it was toggle actual, boom, toggles it on and off. I found a really handy script that I also like to use. I use this a lot on our audit sheets that we send out to clients. Lets you rename the tabs based on the value of certain cells. So in the first cell, I can list multiple business names, or the first tab, I can use multiple business names and then have a button. And once I click the button, the tabs in the sheet are renamed to those business names. So if you use this right here, this will let you rename tabs based on cell values in another tab. Another final really cool thing that we really love is we can create a roll-up report that auto-updates. So you save a copy of your sheets into a single folder, and then you can create your roll-up report that just looks in that folder. And every time a new sheet is added to the folder, the script runs at 3 a.m. and will append that data to the master roll-up sheet. And that's the script for how to do that. Now, I know this was a whole lot, and I talked really fast. Hopefully, it did not hurt you too much. But now when you're looking at Google Sheets, you won't just stare and drool because you'll have a much better understanding of how things work. And in fact, you might really enjoy working in Sheets. Peace out. That's the end of my presentation. That was a friggin' sweet insider guide to Google Sheets or SEO. If you've got any questions, shoot me an email, or if you would like a copy of the slides, you can get them from me. And at the end, the most important bit is a list of all the movies by order of release date. Thanks so much for watching.
Pretty cool stuff, right? That's all the time we have left for this week's episode. So you know what that means. Put your hand on the screen right here. We totally just high-fived because you learned something awesome. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week for another episode of Local Search Tuesdays.